Hi everyone, thank you for having us. So today we're presenting a project that we started this year around February, I think, called Things+Time. It's a community-centered participatory archive of 3D scans specifically. And it's kind of a very localized platform to Jojage or Montreal, which is where we're from. The project is coming out of and is kind of like the first large-scale project of the Cyber Love Hotel, which is a space that I started a little over a year ago in Montreal also. And the idea of the Cyber Love Hotel is to create a space where marginalized artists and community members can come and either work in digital arts if they already do, or enter the field of digital arts and do skill sharing or any type of activity that foster kind of community care in this area. And the idea is really to develop sustainable working practices, specifically outside of academic spaces, outside of corporate spaces, outside of institutional spaces, outside of the nonprofit sector, and outside of governmental offices. So really to have a community-led, fully independent space. And this project specifically came about during COVID, as we saw historic spaces and landmark venues kind of like close their doors, spaces that have been open for like 10, 20, 30, 50, 60 years. That were being closed, and that literally their contents are like on the sidewalk for the trash to pick up the next day. And for me, that was like for anyone, that's quite a shock when you lose such an important venue, and it happens in such speed, even though we know it's coming and we know things are closing. There are so many logistics that it is quite hard to document these things in real time as we're caught up in the moment of it. And I have like personal memory problems, so I've always kept very thorough archives for myself. So I felt really compelled to kind of like do something about this. And so this project is very much anchored in the personal as opposed to institutional practices. And we applied for Digital Now at the Canada Council, and they were aiming specifically to support Canadian artists who were being affected by the pandemic. So it was kind of like a perfect match for that. So the project really aims to allow community members and people from the public to archive kind of things that are in an active process of rapid erasure. So cultures that are currently undergoing losses, whether it be through these spaces or even the death of loved ones, and cultures that, whether they be like on larger scale, on smaller scales, are being erased and that are kind of like time sensitive. So some of the like core principles that we're based on is really empowering individuals who are underserved by institutions in preserving their histories and bypassing sort of like the need of institutional approval to be able to participate in this archival. And we are also really interested in developing our own methodologies based on an ethic of care. And this is kind of like the idea of the Cyber Love Hotel as well. The idea is really that we kind of just move with love and passion, and things happen when people are passionate about them. And then if nobody's passionate about something, well, then it doesn't happen. And so to kind of extend this idea of if you could only do things that you love, what would a workplace like that kind of look like, and kind of building that, as well as the idea of sharing resources, expertise through our various practices. And finally, one of the big outcomes that we're interested in is for artists and people who aren't technologists to encounter the technology of 3D scanning as a participator instead of an observer, and to get familiarized with the affordances, possibilities, and aesthetics of 3D scanning as with an empowering perspective of like, you can do this. Like, this isn't some strange foreign like super technological thing. It's like you're learning it as you're doing it. And to really prioritize experiential gains for the individual people in the project versus any type of outcome, whether material or So I'll let Prakash speak more about our archival practices.
So just to sort of ground some of our practice into theory instead of the other way around, since I think we started doing things, and then now I'm slowly thinking of how this project has a certain kind of research value as a model for different kinds of archival epistemologies or ontologies. And so I really like this quote from Michelle Caswell and co. that says, "Critical archival studies, like critical theory, is emancipatory in nature with the ultimate goal of transforming archival practice and society writ large." And I really do believe that with a development of a new kind of archive that is really rooted in these kinds of community care, that is described with care from the people who are making them or donating them, then this can really sort of reshape these kinds of community structures. And so kind of some reasons why we're really focusing on an archival approach versus just an exhibition is because outside of the fields of library and information studies, museology, history, and the like, often the purposes or values or uses of archives are often obscured. So now, for instance, my research is really related to archives, but then I don't think I've ever really, except for the archives I've worked at, I've never really been to one. It's often unclear where they are, or especially in COVID, if you can go to them, or even for me, what would I even look for in a Canadian archive? So not only are these kind of behind the scenes of archives obscured, but often so are the materials that they have. Since often much of these materials and records that are donated or collected by archives remain hidden and inaccessible to the public. Often this is due to processing backlogs, and if you work in archives or have tried to do archival research in the last couple of years of COVID, you know that these backlogs and the access to them has been quite prolonged. And so, and the records that are often continuously deprioritized for processing often belong to fringe or marginalized communities that are already stigmatized, essentialized, or trivialized within archival description. And this often is a result of when you have a quote-unquote professional archivist who is not tied to the community of whose materials are being collected. And so you often have issues with whatever the opposite of Goetz's thick interpretation, a thick description. It's very thin description. Anyway, we can talk about, if you want to talk about archives in the Library of Canada and how about that and their problems, I'm more than open to trash talking them. No offense if you work there. It is what it is. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. Unless it is, then we can talk. We can talk outside. I'm just kidding. That's not threatening. So our approach considers how a community dialogical intervention into the formation of a new archive or of a new kind of web archive or catalog system can engender new methods of community engagement through a democratization of traditional archival gatekeeping. And so our methodology and platform allows for the artists, so we didn't mention this, but our process of Things+Time involves an artist residency. So we'll allow the artists in residence as well as the public to engage in the archival processes, descriptions, and annotations. And so we'll show you a little demo that I will let Ellie take the lead on.
So this is kind of a screenshot of their interface with how it is now. So you can kind of see the 3D object. And then we have different forms of annotation. We're going to have, I think, text, photo, and audio available. And the idea, especially for audio, is to preserve oral histories as well. So for example, if you're going and you're archiving a place that's important to your grandpa, then your grandpa can tell you the story of the place, and then you can he can be oh, well, this door handle, this thing happened, and then you can pinpoint specifically on the model the door handle, and then you can attach the audio clip to that. So there's sort of this annotation situation going on here. And we're also interested in having an ongoing process of co-design for the platform itself. So we're going to have a series of artist residencies in which we're going to create our first batch of content, so kind of a a capsule collection for the archive, and then with the artists, ask for feedback, being like, what are features that might be interesting to you? What are things that might help clarify? And the platform itself is just in an ongoing development. It's not ever like finished. And the code itself is open source, or we're making it open source. It's forkable, and we do encourage, once it's going to be live, we do encourage people to make their own versions for their own uses, and to just use it and modify it in any way that is relevant to them. And we're also just generally really interested in moving away from tech giants and divesting from these sort of large corporate practices and monetization practices. So we're interested in having our own server and hosting our own data on our own server. And also I don't know if I mentioned this, but the whole project is like by and for people of marginalized communities, specifically people of color, queer people, trans people, neurodivergent people, and our entire our current development team and internal team is represented within those communities, and our artist residencies will be as well. And so I'll let Lou tell us more about actually, my bad. I just wanted to make a note that the Smithsonian actually has a really interesting tool that is essentially the same thing. We realized this like midway through development. It's called the Smithsonian Voyager, and it's really fun. They have really interesting uses for their collection. This code is available on an open source basis, but it's quite heavy and has a lot of its own file format and has a lot of requirements for using it. So we ended up redeveloping our own. So this is kind of what it looks like. So the idea for this is to be lightweight, to accept all sorts of file formats, to try and lower the need for conversion. But in addition to that, we're going to create guides on how to make files, how to lower the polygon count to make them less heavy, how to convert files, which is part also of our educational program, which I will now let Lou talk about.
Can this be higher? No?
I think you can take it out.
I'll just talk like this then. Hello?
Yeah, it works.
Okay. So my name is Lou Fazin, and I am the education director of our project Things+Time. And so my tasks or responsibilities revolve around developing a curriculum for the artist residency that we are making. And so in that process, I kind of like guide what content will be taught in the workshops that we will be offering. And so we've decided, with consulting the team, that we'll be offering workshops on 3D scanning and editing, on project management, on archival practices, and on digital presence, which is like the image of the artist online and kind of like guiding their branding and everything. And so in the process of developing this curriculum, I had to think about how to center the artist instead of centering a specific timeline and instead of centering the content, I'm centering the artist and the people involved in the project. And so for that reason, the curriculum is not definite. We have like an initial outline, but then when the artists are going to be selected and entering the project, we're going to consult them and ask them if they feel like what is going to be taught in the workshops is what they want to learn about, if it's going to be useful for their practice and for the development of their archiving for our platform. And if there's adjustments to do, we're going to do them with consulting the artist. Also the scheduling of when the workshops are going to happen. So we have like an original formula that would be either 2 nights during the week or 1 day in the weekend. But then with the artists, we're going to decide what is the best formula to adapt to their schedules and lifestyles and everything. So it's like an ongoing process, and my role is more to moderate than to make decisions. And also for the workshops, they are going to be led by so-and-so experts that are also community members, that are referred by team members and people we know. And so the process will be to, like, we have desired outcomes for each workshops that we're offering. Then we're going to develop the workshops with the experts, and then the experts will be giving the workshops to the artist whenever the residency is actually going to be happening. And so in the selection of the experts and of the artists, we are trying to reach out to community, because like we said, it's a community-led project. So we're not like doing a general call out where anyone can like apply, because in our approach, it's to strengthen community relationships. And so to be engaging with people that kind of like know each other from far or close, and to make the bond stronger and to make people feel comfortable. We're not trying to make people feel like they need to perform. It's really about making everyone thrive. And I think thriving with people you know makes it like more likely to happen, because you're like more comfortable, and it's easier for you to be vulnerable and express your needs and limitations and everything. So yeah, that is it for me, and I'll let Heather speak.
Okay, cool. I'm also going to pick this up. Hi, I'm Heather. I have 3 primary roles in Things+Time: project manager, human resources, and bookkeeping. As goes with many small organizations, you kind of do whatever needs to be done. So I'm going to be talking about the organizational structure and the internal aspects of the Things+Time project. Basically, our structures and systems that has been creating all the outcomes which we're in the process of. So I wanted to start with a bit of background of how I came into this role, which was before I was working at Things+Time, I spent half a year working 40 hours a week in a tech startup, which used data analytics to make digital marketing plans for the mainstream music industry. This was my first like real adult job, full-time, post-school. And to say it was a bit of a shock would be an understatement. I found it incredibly difficult and unsustainable, hellish work environment, which I actually had to take mental health medical leave after 5 months, because I just could not keep up with the speed, the stress, and the expectations of the workplace. And after I did learn a lot, and there was a lot of positives from this experience, but something it really left me with was I did not want this to be the entry to surviving capitalism for my other community members, and I didn't want someone who had no choice. I had the choice to quit. I was in a financial situation that I could, but I felt very stressed for my other community members who, in surviving capitalism, would have had to persevere in this type of environment. So I knew Ellie through the Cyber Love Hotel and had been complaining about this job and how I was quitting. So, and I talked to Ellie also about, like, I do a lot of events. I'm mostly based in the music community, and I do events, which turns out makes you a really great project manager, because that's what you're doing. I didn't know that was what I was doing. I was just making events happen. But the more professional term I learned was project management. And when Ellie asked me to be part of Things+Time, I was so excited. It was kind of just as soon as I'd gotten out of this awful workplace, it felt like an opportunity to envision an organizational and workplace structure that was hopefully the opposite of what I'd experienced, or at least an alternative. As I said, I didn't want anyone to have to experience the type of environment I just left, but I also knew that we all need to survive capitalism. Ideally, we wouldn't have to participate, but you do. How can we make alternative possibilities to make the survival a little less hellish? So this is our team, our beautiful team of Things+Time. And like any organization, our team is at its core people doing things together. And one of the most interesting and exciting parts was our conversations from the start affirmed that a large part of the Things+Time project is itself an experiment in creating an organization that can be more positive and accessible to those who are marginalized, queer, neurodivergent, or any aspect that otherwise makes most standard workplaces harder than they already are, and they're not that easy to begin with. And we affirm that if we didn't achieve all the outcomes we were aiming for, but in the process everyone involved had a less stressful way to get paid, built relationships with each other, gained work experience that translates well into a CV, and has learning opportunities along the way, then that itself will have been a success. So from the start, we were not goal-oriented of like, we need to achieve these aims no matter what. We will sacrifice our health, we will sacrifice our relationships along the way. If we need to sacrifice those things, we would rather sacrifice the goals of our project or lower them or make them more realistic. And this led me to propose these workplace core guidelines and key values near the beginning of the project to guide our priorities in a positive way. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read you these, but we're going to eventually make them publicly available if people find them helpful in their organizations. And basically the way I went about writing these was I'd done research or reading in the past, but I found this particular article, which was a really great summary of how ideas and very core standards around professionalism enact white supremacy in workplaces. And so what I ended up doing is most of our written core guidelines are inversions of what this article describes as white supremacy in the workplace, which is things like not striving for perfectionism, having room for mistakes, being relationship-oriented, not task-oriented, and nurturing everyone's interests, goals, learning, and passions rather than specific outcomes. This is a really great article. I highly recommend reading it. And then I'm also going to talk about our processes, which I think is one of the most exciting parts of me, is the opportunity we've had to internally develop low-cost and or free organizational practices and what I've started calling capitalist survival tools. Like our team member Adam has written a great basic contract template, which we are going to make available online for anyone to edit and use for their own needs to add higher payment and job security for any freelance or gig economy work they engage in. We also created a Google Sheets template, which makes tracking everyone's hours, everyone's work hours monthly, and auto-generating a summarized professional invoice easier, and then ability to check off if a payment has or hasn't been made, which I think these tools become so embedded in everything you do, they become invisible, but when you haven't been kind of initiated into these tools and practices and taught them, it's what really separates you from having a reasonably okay survival of capitalism versus just like having the worst time. It's like you can do all the work, but has someone helped you like write your first invoice or had a system to like keep track of these things? Like that's what really connects someone doing okay and someone really struggling. So I think that's one of the most exciting parts of like through actively like having a problem like, oh, everyone's working and we need to pay everyone. How do we keep track of that? How do we like invoice? And then the outcome of that actual problem solving, we can then just share like, here's a pre-made tool. You don't need to like get a grant and go through this same process. And I'm not going to go too much into Notion, but this is just a screen grab of our Notion workspace where we do all our knowledge management. And if anyone doesn't know it, I highly recommend Notion. It was recommended to me by a fellow neurodivergent queer friend. And the ability to add emojis to everything is game-changing. It's like if you're visually based And just like, because that was one of the worst things on my job is the knowledge management and the work systems were so inaccessible. That's what really made me fail, was I struggled with task switching and with keeping track of a lot of information at once. And it was just so inaccessible, it caused me to fall behind for no actual legitimate reason of ability, just like it was not made in mind to be accessibly used. And then our last thing is time, the elusive time. Sorry, I'm gonna take a breath. I've been talking a long time. Actually, I'm gonna start with, I think one of the most interesting, have I not been speaking to this enough? No. The most interesting outcomes, I think, has been realizing how inclusive and accessible workspaces require a lot more destruction of workplace standards than you would think. You can't just start with a pre-existing workplace and then start tacking on band-aid solutions to make them more accessible. You have to start with the core foundations that you're building from. And I think one of the most fundamental concepts we came or continue to come into is time, or our understandings of time. And this also led me to, when I was also creating our workplace standards, read a bit more about Western linear ideas of time, which are often called monochronic time, versus polychronic time. Monochronic time means strict schedules, punctuality, productivity, one project, individual motivation, strict evaluation of process. Polychronic time tends to be more about multitasking, flexibility, less predictable, rescheduling is common, prioritizing relationships, group projects, which there are positive and negatives to both aspects, but I think something we've really discovered is, say, a negative is we work perhaps overall at a slower pace overall as an organization, but the slowness has been vital to allowing us time to be sick, be tired, be human, to genuinely do the work of collaboration, to want to do what we're doing, to be able to reschedule if something happens, to adapt our needs, to adapt the project to our needs rather than to adapt our needs to the project. So I think the last thing I wanted to say about time is that it's okay to be late, it's okay to forget, it's okay to need rest, and we can achieve our organizational goals just at a slower pace while not sacrificing the well-being of the people who make up the project. And then I think Ellie has some final thoughts.
Yeah. I guess I just want to say thank you to all the team, and that working with you is just so great, and that I also struggled like a lot, and I mean every single person I know that has ever been to academia or any corporate job has struggled immensely. And it's really, really, it feels just so great to work from a solid base and then to go out into the world knowing that I have like a home base to return to that is based on those principles. And it's been extremely rewarding to have people come to the Cyber Love Hotel and see our project, and then kind of see that as a possibility that something else can be different, and they're still at their job, they're still in the space, in whatever space they're in, but then they're like, oh, these people are doing something else. I don't want to do what they're doing, but I could do something that would fit me as well as this fits them. So I guess one of our hope for the future is just to continue working this way, and to hope that other people can make changes in their lives that will have them like critically engage with capitalism in the way that they make their life better and they make the lives of the people around them better, and that becomes just the motivation. And generally we're also just excited with working with other archives of various sizes and other network projects in seeing how to put our work in sync with each other in a way or another, and just make links across networks, and just excited to start archiving and see all the thought mushrooms that'll come out from our artists and where they want to go with this. So thank you so much for having us. Oh, also if you want to learn more, you can go on Things+Time.net, which is our website. It's plus in letters. I don't think, yeah.